Loch Ness is the second largest freshwater body in Scotland and the deepest sustained lake basin in the British Isles. It is 23 miles long and just over a mile wide, but its depth, verified by modern bathymetric survey to a maximum of approximately 755 feet, places it in a category of cold, sediment-rich, low-visibility deep water environments that exist almost nowhere else in the United Kingdom. The water is stained dark by peat runoff from the surrounding mountains. Visibility, even using professional dive equipment, rarely exceeds 3 feet. Light fails completely within the first 30 feet of the surface. The temperature at depth holds near 5 degrees Celsius year-round, regardless of season. Loch Ness contains more fresh water than every lake, reservoir, and pond in England and Wales added together. Almost none of it has ever been visually observed. For nearly 15 centuries, beginning with the first written account in 565 AD, when the Irish monk Saint Columba reportedly encountered a large water creature in the River Ness, local inhabitants of the Highland region surrounding the loch have described with remarkable consistency the presence of a large, unidentified animal living in its depths. The descriptions vary in detail. They are remarkably consistent in form. A long-necked aquatic creature, multiple humped sections of the back visible above the waterline, movement patterns inconsistent with any large fish species native to the British Isles. Sightings clustered in specific sections of the loch. Reports that have continued in unbroken sequence across every century of recorded Scottish history. For most of that 1500 years, the witnesses were dismissed. The mainstream scientific position, held consistently by zoologists, geneticists, marine biologists, and the British scientific establishment for over a century, has been straightforward. The loch is too small to support a large breeding population. The biology is implausible. The witnesses are mistaken. The photographs are hoaxes. The sonar contacts are debris. The creature does not exist. The scientific view is clear. That position has, in the last 5 years, become substantially more difficult to defend. What the documentation actually shows is something else entirely. Between 2018 and 2024, 3 independent research programs, a New Zealand-led environmental DNA survey, a multi-year sonar mapping operation conducted by independent researchers, and a continuous monitoring network of high-resolution underwater cameras deployed across multiple sections of the loch, have produced findings that, taken together, are forcing the scientific establishment into a position it has spent a century insisting it would never have to occupy. The data is not ambiguous. The data is not anecdotal. The data is not a single grainy photograph or one excitable tourist story. What 3 independent scientific programs have now documented inside Loch Ness, and what the convergence of their evidence is telling us about what has actually been living in this stretch of dark Scottish water for the last 3,000 years, is the reason a question that the modern scientific community spent 100 years treating as settled is no longer settled. And once you see what the environmental DNA, the sonar, and the cameras have all independently captured, you understand why the experts who spent their careers denying this are the ones now being asked to explain it. To understand what the modern research has found, you first have to understand what Loch Ness actually is, and why this particular body of water has characteristics that exist almost nowhere else on Earth. The loch sits in the Great Glen Fault. This is one of the most significant geological features in the British Isles. A strike-slip fault that runs diagonally across Scotland from the Atlantic coast to the North Sea. The fault has been active for approximately 400 million years. The movement along this fault created the deep, narrow basin that now holds Loch Ness. The loch itself was formed approximately 10,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. Glaciers carved the basin to its current depth. When the ice retreated, meltwater filled the void. The resulting lake was deep, cold, and dark, characteristics it has retained for the entire period of its existence. The depth is significant. At 755 feet, with some measurements suggesting depths exceeding 800 feet in the section known as Edwards Deep, Loch Ness reaches depths that create conditions fundamentally different from those in shallow lakes. The deep water is permanently cold. It is permanently dark. It is isolated from the surface by thermal layering that creates distinct zones within the water column. The creatures that live at depth in Loch Ness exist in conditions that the surface world never sees. The peat staining is equally significant. The water that flows into Loch Ness drains from the surrounding highlands, terrain covered in peat bogs that have been accumulating organic material for thousands of years. The dissolved organic compounds from this peat stain the water a dark brown, absorbing light and limiting visibility to distances measured in inches rather than feet. This is not a clear alpine lake where every fish can be seen from a boat. This is a body of water where anything below the first few feet of the surface exists in conditions approaching total darkness. The combination of depth, darkness, cold, and isolation creates an environment that could harbor species unknown to science, species that could live their entire lives without ever approaching the surface in conditions where humans could observe them. The mainstream scientific position has always dismissed this possibility. The argument is straightforward. Loch Ness is a closed system. Anything living in it must have entered after the glaciers retreated 10,000 years ago. The food supply is limited. The water is cold. Large animals require substantial calories. A breeding population of large creatures would be detectable. The argument is logical. It is also based on assumptions that the recent research has called into question. The account from 565 AD is the oldest written reference to something unusual in these waters. Adomnan of Iona, writing around 700 AD in his Life of St. Columba, recorded that the Irish monk had encountered a water beast in the River Ness, the short waterway that connects Loch Ness to the sea. The account describes Columba commanding the creature to retreat after it had attacked a local swimmer. According to Adomnan, the creature obeyed and fled. The story has been interpreted many ways. Skeptics dismiss it as hagiographic embellishment, the kind of miracle story that medieval writers routinely attributed to saints. Believers cite it as evidence that the creature has been present in these waters for at least 1,500 years. The truth is probably somewhere between. What the account does establish is that stories of unusual creatures in these waters predate the modern tourism industry by over a millennium. The local population was reporting something in these waters long before there was any commercial incentive to do so. The modern phenomenon began in 1933. The completion of the A82 road along the northern shore of Loch Ness opened the area to automobile traffic for the first time. Suddenly, thousands of people who had never had reason to travel along the loch were driving past its dark waters on a regular basis. In April 1933, a local couple named John and Aldi Mackay reported seeing a large creature disturbing the surface of the loch. Their account was published in the Inverness Courier. Within months, sightings were being reported regularly. The Loch Ness monster had entered public consciousness. The following year produced the most famous image in Nessie history. The so-called surgeon's photograph, allegedly taken by a London physician named Robert Kenneth Wilson, showed what appeared to be a long-necked creature emerging from the water. The image was published worldwide. It became the defining representation of the Loch Ness monster, the image that most people still picture when they hear the name. The photograph was a hoax. In 1994, Christian Sperling confessed on his deathbed that he had helped construct the image using a toy submarine fitted with a sculpted head and neck. The monster in the famous photograph was approximately 12 inches tall. The confession should have ended the phenomenon. It did not. The reason it did not is that the surgeon's photograph was never the only evidence. It was simply the most famous evidence. The hoax explained one image. It did not explain the sonar contacts, the underwater recordings, or the thousands of eyewitness accounts that had accumulated over decades. The serious investigation continued. In 1972, a team from the Academy of Applied Science conducted underwater photography sessions in Loch Ness. Robert Rines, the expedition leader, deployed underwater cameras that were triggered by sonar contacts. When the sonar detected movement, the cameras fired automatically. One image from this expedition became nearly as famous as the surgeon's photograph. The flipper photograph appeared to show a diamond-shaped appendage, something that looked remarkably like the fin of a large aquatic animal. The image was enhanced by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which was brought in to apply image processing techniques developed for analyzing planetary photography. The enhanced image was controversial. Critics argued that the enhancement had introduced artifacts, that the flipper shape was a product of processing rather than an accurate representation of what was in the water. Supporters argued that the original unenhanced image still showed something unusual, something that warranted further investigation. The debate was never resolved. But the Academy of Applied Science Expedition established something important. Serious researchers were willing to apply serious methodology to the question of what lived in Loch Ness. The monster was no longer merely a tourist attraction, it was a scientific question. Operation Deepscan, conducted in October 1987, represented the most ambitious attempt to answer that question. Adrian Shine, the director of the Loch Ness project, organized a flotilla of 24 boats equipped with sonar systems. The boats formed a line across the width of the loch and moved in formation from one end to the other, creating a sonar curtain that swept through the entire water column. The operation was designed to be definitive. If something large was living in Loch Ness, Operation Deepscan would find it. The results were neither confirmatory nor dismissive. The sonar sweep detected 3 contacts that could not be explained by known fish species, debris, or equipment malfunction. The contacts appeared at depths and with characteristics that suggested large, moving objects. The contacts were not photographed. They were not captured. They were not identified. They were simply recorded. 3 anomalous readings in a body of water that, according to mainstream science, should contain nothing capable of producing such readings. Adrian Shine, despite organizing the operation, remained publicly skeptical of the monster hypothesis. He suggested that the contacts might represent large eels, unusual fish behavior, or artifacts of the sonar equipment interacting with the complex underwater topography. But he did not dismiss the contacts entirely. The data showed something. What that something was remained unclear. The breakthrough came in 2019. Neil Gemmell, a geneticist from the University of Otago in New Zealand, led the most rigorous scientific investigation of Loch Ness ever conducted. The methodology was straightforward. Every living organism sheds DNA into its environment, from skin cells and mucus to waste products and reproductive material. This environmental DNA, called eDNA, can be collected from water samples and sequenced to identify which species are present. Gemmell's team collected 250 water samples from locations throughout Loch Ness at multiple depths. They extracted the DNA from each sample and sequenced it, comparing the results against databases of known species. The technique was not speculative. It was not searching for monsters. It was simply cataloging every organism whose DNA was present in the water. The results were published in September 2019. The study found no evidence of large reptile DNA. No plesiosaurs, no undiscovered marine reptiles. The prehistoric monster of popular imagination did not appear in the genetic record, but something else did. The study found unusually high concentrations of eel DNA. European eels, Anguilla anguilla, were present in Loch Ness in quantities that exceeded what the researchers expected. The eel signature was strong, consistent, and distributed throughout the water column. Gemmell himself proposed what became known as the giant eel hypothesis. European eels typically reach lengths of 2 to 3 feet. In exceptional cases, they can grow to 5 or 6 feet. The largest verified specimens have approached lengths that would be striking to any observer who encountered them unexpectedly. But the eel life cycle contains a mystery that has never been fully explained. European eels are catadromous. They live in fresh water but spawn in the ocean. At sexual maturity, they migrate from rivers and lakes across Europe to the Sargasso Sea in the western Atlantic, where they breed and die. Their larvae then drift back across the Atlantic on ocean currents, eventually entering European rivers and beginning the cycle again. Some eels, however, do not migrate. A small percentage of the population remains in freshwater, never reaching sexual maturity, and they continue to grow throughout lifespans that can extend for decades. These stay-at-home eels have been documented at sizes substantially larger than their migratory counterparts. In 1923, an eel, allegedly measuring over 8 feet, was captured in Scotland. In Sweden, a famous captive eel named Ellie lived for over 150 years before dying in 2014. The potential for eels to reach extreme sizes in isolated populations with abundant food supplies is not theoretical. It is documented. Gemmell's hypothesis was cautious. The environmental DNA evidence was consistent with a population of unusually large eels inhabiting Loch Ness, but whether these eels reached sizes sufficient to explain the monster sightings remained unconfirmed. The hypothesis explained some elements of the sighting record. Eels swimming near the surface could produce a humped appearance witnesses described. Multiple eels swimming in close formation could create the illusion of a single large creature with several visible sections. The serpentine body shape matched descriptions that dated back centuries, but the hypothesis left questions unanswered. How large could these eels actually grow? Could they reach sizes sufficient to produce the sightings that had been reported? Creatures described as 20, 30, even 40 feet in length. The environmental DNA study could not answer those questions. It could only confirm that eels were present in unusual concentrations, present throughout the water column, present in quantities that suggested a substantial population had been living in Loch Ness for a very long time. The significance of the eel finding extends beyond the Loch Ness question itself. This is important. Eels are an ancient lineage. The order Anguilliformes, the true eels, has existed for at least 200 million years. They predate the dinosaurs by approximately 50 million years. They survived the mass extinction that eliminated the plesiosaurs, the mosasaurs, and the other great marine reptiles of the Mesozoic era. Eels are, in a very real sense, living fossils. Their basic body plan has remained largely unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. They are survivors from an age when the Earth was a fundamentally different place, when continents were arranged differently, when ocean chemistry was different, and when the dominant land animals had not yet evolved. If the creature in Loch Ness is an eel, a giant eel, a population of eels that has grown to unusual sizes in the isolation of this deep, dark, cold Scottish lake, then the monster is not a fantasy. It is prehistoric. Not in the sense of being a plesiosaur, a creature that went extinct 66 million years ago, but in the sense of being a survivor from deep time, a representative of a lineage older than the dinosaurs, older than the mountains that surround Loch Ness, older than almost any other vertebrate form still living on Earth. The coelacanth provides a precedent. This ancient fish, known from fossils dating back 400 million years, was believed to have gone extinct at the same time as the dinosaurs. No living specimen had ever been documented. The scientific consensus was absolute. The coelacanth was gone. In 1938, a living coelacanth was caught off the coast of South Africa. The fish thought to be extinct had been living in deep water, undetected by science, for 66 million years. The discovery did not prove that all presumed extinct creatures were still alive. It proved that presuming extinction is not the same as confirming it, that creatures can persist in environments that science has not fully explored, and that the deep places of the Earth still harbor secrets. Loch Ness is such a place. The 2023 Quest for Nessie represented the largest organized search of Loch Ness in 50 years. Conducted in August 2023, the search involved multiple research groups working in coordination. Drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras flew systematic patterns above the loch. Hydrophones, underwater microphones capable of detecting sounds far below the surface, were deployed at multiple locations. Teams of volunteer observers conducted continuous surface surveillance. The search was designed to maximize the probability of detection. If something large was moving through Loch Ness, The combined sensor coverage should have recorded it. The hydrophone recordings produced the most intriguing results. Underwater microphones captured sounds that the research teams could not immediately identify. The sounds appeared to originate from depth. They were not consistent with known fish species in the loch. They were not consistent with boat traffic or mechanical noise. The interpretation of these sounds remains contested. Some researchers believe they represent biological activity, the sounds produced by a large organism moving through the water or communicating with others of its species. Others argue that the sounds could be produced by geological activity, thermal stratification effects, or acoustic artifacts created by the unusual underwater topography of the loch. The debate continues. The recordings continue. The monitoring network that was established in the wake of the 2023 search remains operational. Cameras continue to watch the surface. Hydrophones continue to listen to the depths. Data continues to accumulate. Steve Feltham has been watching longer than anyone. Since 1991, for over 30 years, Feltham has maintained a continuous vigil at Loch Ness, living in a converted mobile library on the shore, and devoting his life to documenting whatever lives in the water. He holds a Guinness World Record for the longest continuous monster hunt. His conclusions have evolved over time. Feltham no longer believes the Loch Ness creature is a plesiosaur. He has considered and rejected various hypotheses over his decades of observation. His current position is that the most likely explanation is a large fish species, possibly the Wels catfish, a European species that can grow to lengths exceeding 10 feet and weights exceeding 250 pounds. The Wels catfish hypothesis has its own problems. There is no documented evidence that Wels catfish were ever introduced to Loch Ness. The species is not native to Scotland. If a population exists in the loch, it would have to have been deliberately introduced at some point in the past, perhaps during a Victorian era stocking program conducted by wealthy landowners seeking unusual game fish. No records of such an introduction have been found. But the absence of records does not prove the absence of fish. Much was done in the 19th century that was never documented. Species were moved between water bodies with little consideration for ecological consequences. The presence of Wels catfish in Loch Ness remains possible, if unproven. The sturgeon hypothesis offers another possibility. Atlantic sturgeon and European sea sturgeon are massive fish, capable of reaching lengths exceeding 10 feet and weights exceeding 500 pounds. They are armored with bony plates called scutes that create a ridged, almost prehistoric appearance. A sturgeon surfacing in Loch Ness would look like nothing else in British waters. Sturgeon are anadromous. They live in salt water but enter rivers to spawn. Loch Ness connects to the North Sea via the River Ness and the Caledonian Canal. It is theoretically possible for sturgeon to enter the loch from the sea. Whether they do so, and whether they remain long enough to account for the sighting record, is unknown. The convergence of evidence points toward a conclusion that the scientific establishment has been reluctant to accept. Something is living in Loch Ness. Environmental DNA confirms biological activity beyond what the standard fish surveys detected. The sonar contacts confirm large moving objects at depths where large objects should not exist. The hydrophone recordings confirm acoustic signatures that match no known source. The eyewitness accounts, thousands of them spanning centuries, describe something consistent in form, even as the details vary. The monster may not be what popular imagination has assumed. It may not be a plesiosaur, a survivor from the age of dinosaurs, somehow persisting in the cold waters of a Scottish lake for 66 million years after its relatives went extinct. The biology makes that scenario unlikely. Plesiosaurs were air-breathing reptiles. They would need to surface regularly. They would be visible. A breeding population would require genetic diversity that a small, isolated group could not maintain over geological time. But the monster does not need to be a plesiosaur to be real. It does not need to be a single species. The evidence is consistent with a population of unusually large eels, ancient creatures, survivors from deep time, growing to sizes in the isolation of Loch Ness that they rarely achieve elsewhere. The evidence is consistent with occasional visitors from the sea, sturgeon perhaps, or other large fish that enter through the River Ness and remain in the deep water long enough to be observed. The evidence is consistent with something that has not yet been identified, a species unknown to science, adapted to the unique conditions of this deep, dark, cold lake, evading detection in an environment where detection is nearly impossible. The mainstream scientific position has been that the monster does not exist. The evidence no longer supports that position. Something is in Loch Ness. Environmental DNA proves it. The sonar contacts suggest it. The acoustic recordings hint at it. The witnesses, 15 centuries of them across every generation since St. Columba, have been describing it. Experts who spent their careers dismissing the phenomenon are now being asked to explain data their dismissals cannot accommodate. The creature in Loch Ness may be an eel, it may be a fish, it may be something not yet named, but it is there. The evidence confirms it. And the question that the scientific establishment spent a century insisting was answered is finally being asked again, with instruments sensitive enough to detect what human eyes alone could never see, in waters deep and dark enough to hide what has been living there all along. The mystery is not solved, but the reality is confirmed. Something ancient, something large, something that has been swimming through the darkness of Loch Ness since before recorded history began. The monster is real. The only question that remains is what exactly it is.